Mishcon Academy Digital Sessions.
Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Kate Higgins, Legal Director in the Corporate Department at Mishcon Academy, and I'm your chair, host for today's session on corporate governance in family business. A huge welcome to Sir James Wates CBE. James is chair of the Wates Group, a leading UK family-owned construction, property services and residential group of companies. And I'm not going to spare his blushes by giving you a few details of his bio. Probably most relevant to today, in January 2018, Sir James was appointed by the government to be the chairman of the coalition group responsible for developing some corporate governance, a code for private companies, the so-called Wates Principles. In 2012, Sir James, you were awarded the CBE, and in 2019, knighted for services to business and to charity. So welcome. Can I take you back in time to 2018, January 2018? We had the collapse of BHS, which of course was a large privately owned business, and Carillion had just gone into liquidation, and the government asked you to get involved. It was introducing a comply or explain and a rule requirement for large private businesses, and suggested developing a code for private companies, and they asked you to become involved. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
It actually started before that. So when the government of the day announced that they were going to get involved in trying to get some control over private businesses, I was horrified. I was then approached by Elizabeth Bagger, who is the director of the IFB at the time, and said, look, this coalition group's been put together and it's been suggested you might like to chair it. We started having very good discussions about what we needed to do. And my starting point was not heavy, burdensome regulation, but something that people would aspire to. And very early on, we came up with the concept of applying and explaining rather than complying, rather than say, we're not doing it because that would have been negative. We want to be much more positive about the way we went around it.
And so it was only the very largest companies who were required by law, of course, to actually include a corporate governance statement in their reports.
Yes, it was. Yeah. I mean, we went on the journey without really knowing what the definition of a large private company was. We eventually got some guidance from BEIS, the business department at the time, as to what the guidelines were, and it was a company that employed more than 2,000 people, or had a balance sheet of 2 billion and turnover of 200 million. And it captured, at the time, about 1,200 companies.
I think in the introduction to the Wates Principles, once they were published, you said you hoped that other large private businesses or other private businesses would use it as a bit of a blueprint, that they would also engage with it.
Yeah, we did, because again, we thought why do we want to do this? Do we want to do it just so people tick the box and say, well, we've complied? Or do we want people to actually see this as a useful tool? So a tool that people can take to look at themselves in the mirror, to measure themselves against certain criteria. Do we do this? Do we do that? To actually then look at their peers, their competitors. Do they do it? Because ultimately, I believe that if you do this well and you demonstrate you're doing it, actually it can give you competitive advantage.
What I love about it, so you've got so many principles in the UK Corporate Governance Code, and it's all its glory and gold-plated standards. But what you've done is distill it down to 6 core principles, and I love the genius of the Wates triangle. So are you happy just to talk through some of the principles? So
right at the top, the so-called North Star is purpose and leadership, and we felt that was very important. So what is the company for? What is its purpose? Is it there purely to make money? Is it there to, in our business, create great buildings, create homes for people, create offices? When you get that in place, that it becomes your guiding light. And alongside purpose, you've got to have strong leadership, because if you set out your purpose, you've then got to lead everybody in the business to that purpose. Underneath that, we felt that there is the governance that you need to have in place. So you need to have a strong board, a balanced board. Alongside that, one of the things that came out when the coalition group was working was a lot of directors in family businesses, particularly, become directors without knowing what their responsibilities are. The fourth area we looked at, the fourth principle, was opportunity and risk. And we were very keen about the emphasis on opportunity, because our view was that too often there's focus on risk. We all have risk committees, but actually we're not looking for opportunity enough. So we were very keen that we raised the bar for people to think about opportunity and say, so what does this opportunity create for us? Just before we came online, you and I were talking about remuneration. And it's something you cannot ignore. It is the headline thing that any business, it does focus on it. And finally, and I think the most important principle almost, other than the North Star, was stakeholder relationships and engagement. Because if you don't get that right, then what chance have you got of having a sustainable business?
So let's look in more detail at purpose and values. How do you go about setting your corporate purpose and aligning your culture and your values? And does the corporate purpose need to be aligned with the family values, or are they completely separate?
I think they're inextricably intertwined. I think if I reflect back on the Wates family over the last 4 generations, which I'm 4th, actually each generation has always looked to improve the business, to improve the way we do things, to look for a better way. So I actually firmly believe that the family values are very, very strongly intertwined with the business values.
Perhaps some of the businesses that we might have in attendance today who are perhaps at a, maybe haven't been in existence already for 5 generations, but might be thinking about the challenges for a family company and board structure as it grows. What tips could you give for that kind of a journey, and how a board can ensure that it remains effective and diverse?
Let's be very clear that the family, or the owner, the founder owners, the family, etc., do not have a monopoly on good ideas. And if you want to be better, you want to get more ideas coming into the company. So I would say it is sensible to look at where your skill sets are as a board, to look where you might be missing things, and then to look to bolster that through either executive appointments or non-executive appointments.
And how do you go about getting the next generation involved in the business?
The biggest challenges that most family businesses face is succession planning. The most difficult is probably 1st to 2nd generation, when the founder is maybe reluctant to hand on the reins to the next generation. Having done that, you've then got the next generation who generally will take a business forward very strongly. History shows that the 3rd generation are the ones who enjoy, oversimplification, the Playboy lifestyle, take their after ball, and the business starts to go backwards. And we started really, I suppose, looking at succession for my generation. How do you transition from one generation to the next? How do you make sure that what you're handing on is something that the next generation wants, rather than what you want to give them? How do you really how do you make sure that you've got the right next generation members in the business? We are working with the executive team at the moment to ensure that these next generation are given the best opportunity to succeed, but also given the right level of challenge, because it is not a given that because your name happens to be above the door. So there are many, many areas to go to get support for succession planning. And I would say, don't be shy about asking for help.
I'd like to sort of perhaps dig a little deeper into change and the way the world is changing and how we ensure our business is sustainable. And I think that's key with Principle 4 on opportunity and risk. So, again, having read your corporate governance report for the Wates Group, there's some fantastically challenging targets in there relating to both diversity and inclusion on the social side. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit around that and risk and opportunity and target setting and how that works.
Maybe there's something about being a private business that you can afford to be bolder. You're not going to be judged by the markets. Your share price is not going to go down because you've made this statement or you fall short of it. Our view is that to get the best access to the most talented workforce, we have to be more diverse.
There's certain things in relation to corporate collapse that we've seen over the years, and the board will turn around and say, we just didn't know. We didn't know that our suppliers were being treated badly, or we didn't know this. So I don't know if you've got any sort of pearls of wisdom on that front.
I think that the most important thing is getting the board reporting right, so that the board is looking at the right things. Actually having a really good audit committee who will lift the drain covers on an occasional basis, and they'll just dive down and have a look at a particular thing because something doesn't feel right. That comes from intuition, comes from experience, comes from being in and around the business.
And it's an interesting thing, isn't it, at the moment, that the consultation that's out there from the government relates to audit and trust. You've mentioned the audit committee and you've mentioned the responsibilities that the board have, and those are very important, obviously. But society has the right for a cross-check against that. And so we see the recent consultation, and we know that quoted companies often rotate their auditors. Indeed, they're required to every 10 years. And I was very interested to see in your report that that was an approach that you'd taken voluntarily as well in the business.
I mean, until 20 years ago, we'd had the same auditors for probably 50 years.
Right.
A small West End boutique firm who the family were very close to, and they were very good. But actually they were very good when we were a tighter controlled, smaller business. When we actually went outside for our executive management, so our CEO for the first time, we felt we needed to up our game as a family. I mean, auditing is auditing, yes, of course it is, but there is a house style and emphasis, and it'll come from the audit partner and his experience of other companies that he's auditing or working within the sector around the things that they focus on. And I think if you bring in a new firm with a new partner, there'll be a change of focus and a change of emphasis. And that's no bad thing from an audit perspective, just lifting the drain covers, seeing what's going on, asking the questions.
So we have a question that's come in. I'll read it out. The virtues of the by now very much watered down ESG principles address the cost of capital. A well-run business will have a lower cost of capital in the long run. Would you think this applies to the Wates Principles as well in a private company context?
The answer is yes, I would hope so. I would hope that because the Wates Principles are all about a better business being done better, that should impact on the cost of capital.
And then a second question that we've got is, would you think that despite all commitments to meritocracy, the family members will win or be preferred at the end of the day?
I would hope that you would never get a family member who is over promoted, because if you end up doing that, you will then you'll get lions led by donkeys. So you need family members to be able to hold their own with their peer group. Ideally, you want them to be able to step forward and advance and progress. But I think there is a natural competence that people will reach. Now, that doesn't then impact on their ownership of the business, because that is separate to an executive position. So I would be concerned if family members were in a position because their name was Wates in our business, and they were patently not as good at the job as the people alongside them.
And I think we're almost at time now, but we'll take one final question. How do you promote productive conflict in your executive team?
That's an interesting one. And I suppose it happens naturally, to be honest, because our executive team is made up of our CEO and our CFO, plus the support functions, so HR, commercial. And then alongside that, we've got our sort of 5 key business leaders who, by their very nature, are competitive. And there will be a lot of competitive tension between them, which is good, because they each want their business to be the one that gets the pat on the back at the end of the year from the family. We've done well this year. We're not like that at all, by the way. The whole productivity thing has been really interesting. The impact on our productivity through COVID and which businesses have recovered quicker. Some businesses have actually become more efficient with less people because they've changed the way they've done things. Others have said, well, we can't quite change, it's a bit more difficult. But having seen others do it, it raises the game. So they feed off each other. And that, I suppose, is where it comes from.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, and I'm sure we all benefit from what you've had to say. Yes, let's keep the drive to make business a force for good in society. Thank you so much.
The Mishcon Academy Digital Sessions. To access advice for businesses that is regularly updated, please visit mishcon.com.